Hello, hello, or should I say Assalamu alaikum for this very special edition of the African Five-A-Side podcast. My name is Maher Mizahi. I'm your host, as usual, and this podcast is still brought to you by africasaCountry.com. Please go check them out. Always have very, very interesting articles up on the website that I think if you're interested in anything Africa, whether it's social issues, politics, economy, that's a website that you have to frequent very, very often. So, why is it necessary to start the podcast that way with the Islamic greeting of Assalamu alaikum? Because we are in the middle of Ramadan, as you could probably tell by the title of this video. And I wanted to just do a special, shorter podcast very quickly on Ramadan and football and what are the implications. So, what is Ramadan? Does it affect performance? And what's the best way to quote unquote deal with it? And so let's start. What is Ramadan? For those of you who don't know, if you've been living under a rock, in the in Islam, in the Muslim religion, Ramadan is one of the 5 pillars. So it's something that's mandatory, something that all Muslims have to do, and it's a yearly thing. It's 30 days of fasting throughout the month of Ramadan. No food, no water from sunrise to sunset. This is probably things that you already know. Every year, Ramadan moves up 10 years according to our standard international calendar because it operates on the lunar calendar. So although this year it's in March, 10 years from now it can be in January, for example. So it's going to keep moving up 10 days at a time. Is there a special exemption for people that do not fast? There is for, sick people, pregnant people, of course. But there isn't one for athletes. According to many Islamic scholars, according to the consensus, the ruling for a person to not fast is the same for footballers and non-footballers alike, according to an imam from Manchester named Abu Isa Ni'matullah, who is somebody that is a huge football fan, very well-respected scholar in his domain, and has spoken to professional footballers about Ramadan and fasting, players like Frederick Canute and many, many others based in the UK. He also continues to say, if they are coming to a moment, however, where the physical exertion makes them ill or they are about to suffer clinical dehydration, then they may break their fast depending on how dangerous it is. And I mean, that's a threshold that can be vague at times, but it's something that the athlete is going to have to determine themselves. So now that we know what Ramadan is, does it affect performance? There needs to be more literature on the subject. To this day, to this point, we only really have 2 serious studies about the effects of fasting, or the effects of Ramadan fasting in particular, on footballer performance. One was commissioned out of Tunisia, the other one commissioned out of the state-of-the-art, highly respected medical facility in Qatar, the Espetar Institute. And that's the one that I really read. I received the text, I read it, I consumed it, and it's really informed a lot of my thinking on this subject over the last decade or so. And so let's dig into what the results of that study were. First of all, as a general rule, fasting is very healthy. These are a lot of modern day trends about, fasting, whether they be a 16-hour fast to an 8-hour interval of an eating window. Some people do 23 hours of fasting to 1. That's called OMAD, or 1 meal a day. It's something that's, becoming more of a trend, in Western cultures as well, non-Islamic cultures all around the world, even though it's, I think, widely practiced across all religions in the world. But fasting is healthy. But is it optimal for athletic performance? I think the strictly scientific answer to that is no, it's not optimal. To perform at a very high level, your body needs high glycogen levels. It needs energy. It needs to be well hydrated to avoid things like cramping. And so I think from a strictly scientific level, if we're talking about blood cells and, mitochondria and protein and all of that, macronutrients, I think it's any serious scientist will tell you that fasting, meaning, not eating from sunrise to sunset, not drinking from sunrise to sunset, cannot be physically, biologically optimal for athletic performance. However, that said, athletic performance is not a strictly scientific biological endeavor. And so this is where, sometimes we had people in football commenting on this without too much knowledge. So we can have, for example, the former Newcastle coach, Alan Pardew. At the time, he was coaching Demba Ba, the Senegalese striker, who is a devout Muslim who does fast. And he said, Demba Ba, he's talking in 2011, I believe. He said, had a slow start here because of Ramadan, in my view. It's difficult for structures. Fasting takes their sharpness away. Demba Ba contested that. And even though, I mean, how can you contest it, right? We just said that strictly biologically speaking, if you fast, that's less than optimal for athletic performance. And the quick answer is that you have to believe in the power of the mind as well, and the power of the spirit. It's mind over matter. There are many, many examples across professional sports of Muslim athletes, especially devout Muslim athletes, performing better in the month of Ramadan than they do outside of it. And a few years ago, it was Kyrie Irving from the Brooklyn Nets in the NBA, and everybody knows the Nigerian center Hakeem Olajuwon, who used to post, career highs in points, rebounds, and assists when he was a center for the Houston Rockets during the month of Ramadan as he was fasting. Frederick Kanute also he's on record saying that I always performed better in the month of Ramadan than outside of it. And so how do we reconcile what I just said with the high performance levels of some athletes? I think the Algerian doctor, somebody that I respect a lot, somebody that I met who was part of this Qatari study, I think he explains it best when he says, one has to remember that it is highly likely that the effects of Ramadan are also linked to the spiritual qualities and physical capabilities of each athlete. Faith and belief is a big factor. This is the key sentence here. If players believe that fasting will have no impact on their performance, then it probably will not. If they have a doubt that it may, then they had better eat. And there are athletes, that like Mesut Ozil or Nasser Chadli during the 2014 FIFA World Cup for playing for the Belgian national team or the German national team that sought out religious opinions that would have them be exempt from fasting. They maybe they felt like it would hamper their performance. They sought those exemptions and they got them from some religious leaders. And so, but what Zarghini said there, that last sentence, if players believe that fasting will have no impact or that will improve their performance, then it probably will. And if they have a doubt, then they better eat. That's the power of the mind over matter. That's the power of the mind over the body. How can you quantify, spiritual motivation, somebody being devout, somebody believing that God is helping them perform on the pitch, that if they fast, knowing that all the attention is on them, knowing that they're representing their religion, knowing that they're practicing their religion and that they're sacrificing in God's way, and they believe that God is going to reward them for that. How do you quantify, how do you measure that kind of spiritual, motivation, inspiration, that level-headedness that player would play the match with after? You can't. And perhaps that, any serious scientist will tell you that, the mind is a crazy thing. They cannot measure, the mind cannot be, limited to science. The spirit cannot be limited to science. So, and overall, that's the general conclusion of many of these studies, is that we cannot tell you if a player is going to be negatively affected by fasting or not, because it's a case-by-case basis. For some players, maybe if they're deeply devout or if they're deeply religious, it could perhaps improve their performance. And for others who maybe feel like they're being compelled to fast because of social pressure or because of anything else, maybe it's going to hamper their performance. So how do we deal with it? Where I'm based in Algiers and, across the Middle East, North Africa, across many Muslim countries around the world, what they simply do is that they will shift the entire footballing calendar. So matches where I'm at right now are taking place at 10 p.m. It's it's the same in many places across the Middle East. And it's funny because being in a country where, the vast majority of people are Muslims and mostly everybody's fasting here, it feels like the entire calendar is shifted. People stay up at night, they sleep later, they wake up later as well. And that's probably the main way that people deal with it in the Middle East and North Africa. But let's say you're a player playing in the Premier League. Let's say you're a player playing, at a huge club. How should the club deal with it? there are three main factors in trying to optimize physical performance for a fasting athlete in the month of Ramadan. There's nutrition, hydration, and sleep. So, nutrition, there's an adjustment that happens because instead of your daily three meals that most athletes will have during the day, we're moving to two meals. You usually have one when you're breaking your fast, and then you usually have one right before you start fasting again, right before sunrise. And so two meals instead of three. And here nutritionists recommend that the meal right after sunset has to be high in macronutrients, high in glycemic foods, potatoes, rice, things that are going to, this is before sunrise. Complex sugars, complex energy, things that are going to last throughout the day. Whereas the meal right when you're breaking your fast should be maybe a little bit lighter, should be a little more protein based, and so on and so forth. So this is something that nutritionists at clubs could implement. They could work on a diet, a dieting schedule for their top players, and make it tailor made for them. Hydration. Here, same thing. Nutritionists, the ones from the studies, the ones that have studied this, recommend that athletes try to drink as much water as they can during their eating window in shorter intervals. So every 30 minutes, drink your 100 milliliters, 150 milliliters. Don't take like a 5-hour break and then drink a liter and then take another 2-hour break, drink 5 liters. That's not how you're supposed to do it. It's supposed to be short intervals, little amounts of water throughout the night, and that should help with hydration throughout the day. And finally, sleep, because as I've explained, everything sort of shifts, and as a result, you're spending more time awake at night. Usually, that means that in a lot of Western societies that don't accommodate Muslims for throughout the month of Ramadan, and I think it would be unreasonable to expect everybody to accommodate their entire lifestyle to what is usually a minority in the country, and especially with the Ramadan being a rolling holiday and switching, it'd be a yearly thing that they have to keep shifting the calendar. So obviously you can't expect Western societies to completely accommodate the Muslim observing minority, but sleeping is a big problem. So as I said, they spend more time awake at night. Then you can't really make up for it during the day because you have school, you have work, and so on and so forth. Now, footballers, they have a lot of free time. If you ever speak to a footballer, they're going to tell you, we go train for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then maybe they have a film session, maybe they have massage and physio. Usually they don't spend more than 3 to 4 hours at the facility. And so they have a lot of free time throughout the day. They'll tell you that themselves. And so it isn't a huge deal because you can sort of catch up with a lot of napping if you're a Muslim athlete. So they need to nap more than often to make up for the time that's lost after sunset. As for training, it's been interesting seeing these scientists as well try and figure out what is the ideal training window. Is it after sunset? Is it before sunset? Is it before sunrise? Is it after sunrise? The consensus here is actually that training after sunset is best. So break your fast, get a light meal inside of you, maybe wait a little, just for a little digestion, and then you can do your physical activity. So really the schedule we have in the Middle East, North Africa is perfect. If you have a 10 p.m. kickoff, for example, you break your fast. Right now we're breaking our fast here around 7 p.m. You have 3 hours to digest, eat something light, and go perform. The Singapore Sports Council did aerobic tests with a youth national team after sunset and before Ramadan and during Ramadan, and it's called the Wingate test. The Wingate test results were the exact same before Ramadan and during Ramadan after sunset. So they really found no difference in performance, in aerobic performance at that window. So after sunset, a few hours, digest, and it should be good. And then finally, psychological support. That's something that, clubs could do that could mean a lot to Muslim players. I thought Brendan Rodgers in Leicester City did an absolutely great job 2-3 years ago with Wesley Fofana, the French center half, who was fasting. And, Brendan Rodgers went out of his way to praise his performance every single time, to say, I can't believe he's doing what he's doing. He's playing so well. And I think that's, really great. And in general, the Western European countries, in my opinion, do a very good job of accommodating, these professional athletes. And they should, because in the end, if you accommodate your athlete, if you make them feel welcome in general, they're going to feel that loyalty and they're going to want to perform for you, right? So the more you invest into them, the more they're going to reflect it right back. There's obviously one main obvious exception to the rule, and that's France. I think France is the only country in Western Europe that refuses to institute breaks in the match. You know, like at times you could be watching a match at night and the referee will blow a whistle for maybe 15-30 seconds. It's not dissimilar to a cooling break, and a Muslim athlete will say at sunset, can I please break my fast? The referee will blow the whistle. They'll go to the sideline, maybe drink a sip of water, maybe have an electrolyte pack, maybe have, I don't know, a quick fruit or something, and 30 seconds later he blows the whistle and we're back. France is the only country that refuses. Only country that refuses, under the guise of keeping neutrality and secularism in sport. That's something that's very important for French society. So, but Abdoulaye Doucouré, the Everton midfielder, he spoke about this. He spoke about how much easier it is culturally, playing in England than in France. So yeah, I didn't want to take too long. I just wanted to do a shorter podcast today about, Ramadan and football, because you're going to be watching football over the next 25 days now, and you're going to be seeing athletes who are fasting, breaking their fast. And I just wanted to perhaps answer any outstanding questions that one might have about fasting athletes. And yeah, so to all those who are fasting, who are watching this video, Ramadan Mubarak. To all those who aren't, I hope you learned something, and that this was slightly educational. We're on the verge of another international break. I cannot wait for that. So we're going to be releasing over the weekend, just tomorrow or after tomorrow, a preview for all the African national teams of this March international break, which is mostly going to be made up of a lot of friendlies. So that should be fun and exciting. So yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll speak to you soon. Peace.